going. For Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews alike, that rate today is just about the highest of the modern nations, a TFR of 2.7 in 1984. If Israel's Jewish population had remained at the 600,000 figure it was at when the state was founded in 1948, instead of the 4 million it is today, it is hard to imagine that Israel could have survived. And further, if not for the special nature of its relationship with the United States, a nation as small and beleaguered as Israel would find it difficult and perhaps impossible to afford the sophisticated weapons which are necessary for its continued existence. Oh God. The United States provides Israel with credits and subsidies of several billion dollars per year. Nearly 1,000 per Israeli citizen, and even so, the Israelis must devote 30% of their GNP to defense, require military service up to age 49, and operate on a permanently militarized footing with a spirited and well-educated military. The Israeli example, therefore, can hardly be taken as a general model for overcoming the national security disadvantages of a low population base. Besides, unlike the Israelis versus the Arabs, most nations, in most circumstances, cannot assume they will have a continuing technological and educational advantage over their rivals. And if opposing nations maintain an approximately equal level of scientific, educational, material, and industrial advancement, it is the population level that can make a major difference. That is why it can be dangerous when traditional competitors suddenly move along different demographic paths. Suddenly, the French felt that the balance of power was shifted fatally against them when, in the late 19th century, their growth of population dramatically slowed, while that of their European competitors continued upwards. France had known a position of considerable population advantage over the British, Germans, and Austro-Hungarians. But by the early 1890s, it was inferior in size to all three. This period of population decline corresponded closely with the fall of French national power and influence. Similarly, the Germans felt themselves considerably weakened by their failure to keep pace with the growth of the Russian population. If population plays a heavy role in both the military and military-related economic spheres, it should be clear that it is also potent in the international political realm, where not only military power but wealth are the chips in the games that nations play. In a world increasingly interdependent in economic matters, the sheer sizes of domestic markets and labor forces are among the critical variables in international competitiveness. America's wealthy continental market of 240 million people gives it geopolitical influence and leverage that smaller nations do not have. How many Hondas can you sell to Holland? Conversely, it is not an accident that Holland is not able to produce jumbo aircraft like the Boeing 747. As in life, so in politics, other governments and/or foreign corporations have to try to be nice to the big fellows on the block.
Okay.
And there are dimensions of power and influence beyond the standard military, economic, and political ones. Culture counts. Values count. It is the primary goal of American and Western policies to see to it that our values can survive, and one hopes spread. If the peoples of the world admire Western values and seek to adopt Western values in their own ways for their own uses, we are stronger and safer. We then have a better chance that our children will live in a user-friendly world that honors the values we honor. In large measure, that is why our government funds the United States Information Agency, Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and Radio Liberty, the National Endowment for Democracy, student and cultural exchange programs, as well as certain aspects of the CIA, the Peace Corps, and the Agency for International Development, just to begin a long list. They are all parts of the contest of ideas. Our allies are involved in many similar ventures for similar reasons. and so are our adversaries. As never before, we all know that ideas move people. If Western culture flourishes, we flourish. If it falters, we falter. Does population, its levels, its direction, influence cultural potency? Of course it does. Population, as we have noted, influences power, economics, and politics, and these factors clearly interlink with culture and values. How? Weak nations tend to emulate strong ones in many ways. Big and wealthy nations produce and export goods and services that directly or indirectly transmit values and culture. Consider only one example for the moment. Why do American movies and television programs dominate the global market? Oh, excuse me. Start an answer by asking a different question. Why don't Dutch movies and television programs dominate the global market? Because there is an economy of scale in some aspects of culture, just as there is in military weaponry or in the automobile industry. Nations that are populous and wealthy enough to build aircraft carriers can also amortize the cost of a multitude of high-budget television dramas, sitcoms, and movies. Such products, already profitable or near break-even in a large domestic market, can be sold overseas at relatively low additional costs. And when Dallas is on the air every week in Algeria and then denounced scene by scene in mosques by fundamentalist mullahs, on balance the West, believe it or not, benefits. Modernism is what the mullahs fear, and it's what we believe in, even if Dallas shows us sordid side of it. When cassettes of American movies circulate in the Soviet Union, the viewers are astonished not so much by the violence or sex, but by the backgrounds and the street scenes, showing a level of living unimaginable in Russia. It is interesting. For years now, Americans have been bemoaning the fact that the Japanese manufactured most of the world's estimated 150 million VCRs, even though the original technology was American. What we forget is that while the Japanese sell the hardware, America sells the lion's share of the software in the world. Movies, rock music, television programs. Indeed, these days, one can make the case the world is flooded with the manifestations of a full range of American culture, good and bad, ranging from political campaign techniques to clothes, to fast food, music, movies, television serials. Henry Luce may have been right when he said this would be the American century. That doesn't happen to all big, populous, strong countries, but it is hard to imagine that in this day and age, it can happen to little, weak countries. We come to a final thought. Democratic values are contagious. They have spread remarkably in the last 2 centuries. The democratic ideal needs carriers. Who are the carriers? Powerful nations. In recent times, primarily in the US, France, England, and a few others. If these national carriers are weakened in the relative scheme of things by diminished population strength and its outward ripples, is it possible that the spread of democratic values may be slowed, or stopped, or reversed? Chapter 8. What will happen geopolitically, geoculturally? It should not be necessary to dwell upon the fact that one cannot predict the future. We do not know if there will be a war, or wars, booms, or busts. We do not know if Eastern European nations will, somehow, break away from the Soviet Union. We do not know if the Third World will suddenly bloom. We do not know if the world will be hit with new plagues or drastic climatological changes. All that is clear to me for the purposes of this book is that some major demographic change is on its way. So I ask you here to speculate with me that on the basis of all other things being equal. For the sake of argument, then, let us accept the predicates laid out here. that we do indeed face important demographic change, with the West on the short end.